Hey friends, Pastor Bill Walden here with Build Up the Church. Hope you're doing great. In Matthew chapter 9, we see Jesus calling Matthew to follow him, to become a tax collector. He was a tax collector. He called Matthew to come and be a disciple, a student, a follower of Jesus. And Matthew was a tax collector, and he was a traitor to his country. Rome was the occupying force, the occupying government in Israel. They used Jewish people to collect taxes from the Jewish citizens to give Rome tax money. But the tax collectors were allowed to overcharge, and then they were allowed to keep whatever they could make. So the fact that Jesus called Matthew was unheard of. I mean, he called the worst guy. I mean, I read somewhere that the only person worse than a tax collector in the eyes of a Jewish person was a leper. So Jesus went down to the lowest rung on the cultural ladder to call Matthew, and yet he called him. And so Matthew followed him. And it says, while Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. The Pharisees saw this, and they asked his disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? So the Pharisees were the separated ones. There were 6,000 of them in Israel, and they prided themselves in holy separation. They prided themselves in believing that they were right with God because of their ancestry and also because of their own behavior. They believed that they perfectly kept the law of God. And so they saw Jesus as making a terrible mistake here. I love what Jesus says. You have to love this. On hearing this, Jesus said, it's not the healthy that need a doctor, but the sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. Jesus said the important thing isn't that you follow religious laws, even to the point of not allowing yourself to have mercy on people. Yes, followers of God are called to holiness, but not to the point of isolation, to where we never interact with anybody. The Pharisees were outraged at what Jesus was doing. And yet Jesus said, I didn't come for the so-called healthy, like you think you are. I came to call sick people, spiritually dying people. And I thought about it. When Jesus sat down at that table with all those people, it says many tax collectors and sinners, so it may have even been a rented hall or something, not just Matthew's living room. There must have been like dirty jokes going on and cussing, and maybe some people were drinking a little too much wine, and these people were just living without God. And Jesus was willing to not become like them. Jesus never sinned, he never compromised, but he was very happy to associate with them because he knew that they were sick and they needed health, they needed saving, they needed spiritual salvation, spiritual healing, mental, emotional, psychological healing, physical healing. So Jesus was willing to sit down with the people that the Pharisees were unwilling to sit down with. One commentator that I read said the Pharisees were like doctors who could tell you that you were unhealthy, but they were unwilling to risk getting infected by trying to help you. They were just those that pointed out problems. Jesus wasn't that way. Jesus still isn't that way. I love that he sat down with them. And so as a follower of Christ, I want to be willing to sit down with anybody. If you're a follower of Jesus, are you willing to sit down with people that, have coarse language or have ungodly behaviors and maybe even flaunt those ungodly behaviors? Listen, if it offends you, it really offended Jesus because he was perfectly holy. But he was willing to meet people where they were at and not isolate himself. And so if you're a follower of Jesus, don't isolate yourself. You might hear some words, you might hear some language, you might see some things that cause some grief in your heart. But that's worth the sacrifice, isn't it? To go love some people. So that's what Jesus did. He was happy to sit down with those who were sick. If you're a Christ follower, don't just hang out with those who are quote-unquote healthy. But find a way to sit down with those who are sick. Of course, we have to be careful to not be influenced in a negative way. But let's not be so careful that we isolate, because then the sick never hear about the great physician, Jesus Christ. So, some things to think about. Thanks for watching. God bless you. Bye-bye.